I'd like to welcome Geoff Cruickshank. Hey, Jeff, how you doing?
Hey, Mike.
It's
Thanks for having me
morning.
on.
Yeah, it's morning for Jeff. I just want to let our audience know that. And yes, thank you for coming on. I want to just lay out some key points in your biography here, Jeff, because the things that are relevant. You're you're a security and electronics professional, correct? And
Yep, that's correct.
I did notice, like on your LinkedIn, you work currently in like LNG production, liquid natural gas. You've also
Yep.
worked in the area of power generation, and it looks like defense aviation, that sector,
Yep.
Boeing.
Yep.
Yeah. Um, and you have a consulting firm, correct? Industrial automation and security.
Yes, that's right.
And you've also worked for Australian intelligence, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And I know there's a lot you can't say about that, right? But my understanding from another interview I saw you do with the one with Ross, you started in like 2005 and worked for at least a decade or so.
Yep. Yep.
And one of the things I want to mention this for because it's really relevant, I feel. You said in the interview with Ross that you actually designed and installed high security skiffs. So they're like the rooms that government officials go into to review like highly classified documents, correct? So it's very secure space.
Yeah, there's certain intrusion detection systems that are not available to the general public, and they have to be used for these facilities. And I had to design and commission them and make sure that they worked correctly, and then write a certificate to say that yeah, they conform to the standards.
And you did that for both. You said you were certified to do this, right? For both Australian and US intelligence.
Well, the U.S. Marines have
Oh,
they
Marines. Okay.
call it the Marine Rotation Force Darwin. They had a need to get a armory built for storage of their weapons, which is they use the same alarm system. So yeah, I had to do that for them.
Okay. Um, I also I want to mention just I've had the chance to speak with Jeff. So I first found out about his interview with Ross in August, and we've had several Zoom calls and a lot of email communication to prepare for this. And I just want to say, I'm extremely impressed, Jeff, with your your intellect, your ability to analyze and very methodically go through data and very methodically analyze the data. Your knowledge of U.S. Cold War history, I think, would humiliate or embarrass any American. I mean, I'm really, I couldn't come close to the level of knowledge you have. It seems like you also have, in addition to just general Cold War history, you understand the military side of it, um, operations side, the technology, military technology, and the weapons technology. Like you seem to really understand how like nuclear weapons work and the various types of nuclear weapons. Is that correct? You seem to have a deep knowledge of all these related areas that really prepared you for doing this analysis.
Just from reading declassified information from the 1960s, a lot of the stuff's redacted, but sometimes they miss redactions, and you can uh, deduct things from that.
Well, um, is there anything else in your bio that you'd like to mention that I didn't mention that's relevant to this discussion?
No, you pretty much covered off there, but I'd just like to say that Danzel's segment is a perfect segue into this, because this is the most heavily gaslit subject of them all. And even last week, when President Trump was on the Joe Rogan show and they discussed JFK and UFOs, Joe Rogan posted yesterday on Twitter that people are finding it hard to find that on YouTube. So he shared the link on Twitter or X. So, and it may not be YouTube or Rasmussen, as you alluded to before, they're doing it. It might be the actual agencies not wanting people to look at that stuff. So it's not the actual provider, it's the communications network that's being fiddled with.
Wow, interesting. So you're saying it might not even be just regular YouTube shadow banning. It could be outside interference.
Possibly. Yep.
Yeah. Wow. Um, Now, I also want to explain to the audience that now what we're going to talk about, the research you've done, you've basically looked at it's all publicly available documents, correct?
Yeah, that's right. There's plenty of people that come up and say, I heard this and someone told me that, but they're just stories without hard evidence. And, declassified information, particularly the JFK assassination files, that 2022 was a watershed year for a lot of the stuff that came out in the church committee that was declassified.
So for our audience, a lot of your research you said has been in the U.S. National Archives. So you've been able my understanding from the way you've talked about this is the U.S. National Archives has like this vast, I mean, just an unbelievable number of documents, and you're really good at knowing how to search for things, right? So just because it's posted in the archive, it doesn't mean the public knows about it, right? So you've been
Right.
able to
And
use.
that's one of their mitigations of people finding out is flooding them with so much information that it just takes years for people to go through stuff.
Now, and you've also been able to sort of so one source is the National Archives, another source is just FOIA information that's put out in public, and then a lot of what you're doing is cross-checking these various documents with previously released documents that the public knows about, right? That are
Yeah.
generally known in the public. Okay, so I just want the audience to understand, like, this is your approach. It's not like there's no hocus pocus here. There's no you haven't been given secret documents. This is all publicly available information, and you're finding it and you're analyzing it at a deeper level.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to do, was connect dots basically.
Okay. Um, I was wondering, how did you come to I mentioned to the audience that I discovered you because I'm not an ex I'm by and knowing means an expert in this issue, but I'm sort of casually interested in it. So I do listen to a lot, videos and things like that. When I have free time, I'll listen to, like, if I want to listen to something. So I have some things that I go to about UFOs, some podcasters and video YouTube channels. Um, I also learned I have a friend who's really, I would say, an expert on this issue, and he shares things with me. Um, but my understanding is that the interview you did in August was with Ross. It's Coldheart, right?
Yep.
He's a very prominent Australian journalist, like really high level, and my friend told me that he's also considered, like, globally, like the premier journalist on UFOs, or what we're calling today UAPs, right? Is
Yep.
that correct? So so Ross, the guy that interviewed you that I saw, he's really at the top as far as journalists go. And I'm just wondering, how did he come to get connected with you and invite you for an interview? How did that come about?
Well, I actually went back further, Mike. Ross in 2009, Ross got in contact with a gentleman in France that found a whole heap of old photographs, with glass plate photographs. And he asked people, anyone in the Australian public, if they recognise any of the people in their photographs. And my grandfather was one of them. So that's his book, The Lost Diggers.
Oh my Lord.
So I contacted Ross because I saw a photo of my grandfather in those photos, and that's how the connection started. That was 2009, 2010.
I see. Okay, so you knew Ross. Okay, gotcha. All right.
Yeah.
Now I want to just share my screen briefly with our audience, because I want to be clear with the audience. This is a very complicated subject, simply because, number one, you know so much about it, right? But then you've got, like, it ties in Cold War events, all the code names for the operations, all the details about the operations that are very complex. So, and because Ross is an expert at this, when I listened to the interview you did with Ross, I'm going to be honest with everyone. I listened to that thing between August and today probably 12 times, and it's an hour and 15-minute interview. Really, so it's very complex, and so I needed to parse it out to understand it. So but that's because, Ross has this high level of expertise. So for a general audience, I just want to share this very briefly so I can show the audience how we're structuring our discussion here. And I think it's going to make it easier for them to absorb the information. So after, through my exchanges with Geoff and then listening to the interview over and over again, taking notes, organizing my thinking, the way we're going to talk about this tonight is you can look at Geoff's findings as falling into three categories, and I list them here, and I've organized them so they build on each other. So we're going to try to simplify this. So the first thing we're going to talk about is some of Geoff. You can look at Geoff's research findings on the most basic level. They just confirm that the U.S. government has direct knowledge of UFOs, right? So that we're just going to show some documents that Geoff uncovered that just show the U.S. government they have film footage, they have documentary evidence, and they discuss it internally, right? They're acknowledging like these things exist, right? Now, at the next level, part two of the discussion, we're going to talk about the MJ12 document. So just we'll get into this in greater detail, but just briefly, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Geoff, but the MJ12 documents, they're a series of documents they're highly classified documents that were released in waves between the mid 80s to the mid to late 90s. So these were classified documents that show that the US government knew about, was tracking, was retrieving, and reverse engineering the technology of UFOs, right? When those documents came out, a lot of people said, wow, this is proof. The government knows about this, right? And of course, the debunkers came in and said, no, these are fake. So the next thing we're going to talk about is how some of the things that Geoff has uncovered match up with these MJ12 documents that a lot of people are trying to say are fake, right? So a lot of Geoff's findings validate or authenticate some of these MJ12 documents, right? So that's the second level. And this is a big deal in the UFO community, right? And then at the third level, if we look at what we talk about in level 1 and level 2, given what we know about 1 and 2, it suggests that we have to reinterpret or revisit and rethink perhaps some Cold War events, which Geoff has also done. Geoff did that in his interview with Ross. So this is how we're going to organize the discussion. Okay, so I will stop my share, and we do have documents and some video we'll be sharing. So Geoff, starting off with the first thing we want to talk about is just some simple findings you had that show that, number one, the U.S. government had knowledge of UFOs and had actually retrieved some UFOs. And there are two basic events we're going to talk about right now. The first one is Operation Bluegill Triple Prime, correct? All right, so this was an operation that took place in the early 60s during JFK's administration. And then the second thing we'll talk about is Geoff has done some analysis related to, I'm sure everyone remembers last year around the time the Chinese balloon flew across the US, we also learned that NORAD shot down over Alaska what they called a UAP. It was an unidentified object, right? So Geoff, we're going to talk about that too. Geoff has done some analysis related to that. So Geoff, if we could start off with Operation Bluegill, what can you just give us an overview? What was Operation Bluegill Triple Prime?
So, Mike, in the early 1960s, a report surfaced from RAND Corporation, which was Research and Development, was a spin-off of Douglas Air Company, and the US Air Force was a non-profit research organization. And they discovered that high energy X-rays can actually take out incoming ICBM re-entry vehicles by a process called thermomechanical spallation. And what that is say you've got an inch of steel coming in the atmosphere. If you can,
like a missile that
yep,
the case is like an inch wide. Yeah.
With a nuclear weapon on board, the X-rays hit the outer surface and heat the steel up very quickly, so quick that it can't expand fast enough. And what happens is the inside blows off. That's called the sporulation, and when that happens, it destroys the plutonium pit or the uranium pit of the nuclear weapon, and either makes it fizzle and very low yield or not work at all. So that's what bluegill triple prime was. It was an experimental warhead that used gold in its outer casing to generate those X-rays.
So the idea was if the U.S. what our government thought that if the USSR had sent a missile in, that we could destroy the missile by exploding something that would send all these X-rays to hit the missile. It would heat up the outside, but it wouldn't
Yeah,
expand fast enough, and it would destroy or blow out the inside. Is that
yeah. Either the missile in the boost phase before it deploys the re-entry vehicle in space, or as the re-entry vehicle is coming into, depending how much warning that you get. X-rays absorbed in the atmosphere by nitrogen, but outside the atmosphere, they can go for hundreds of miles. So the earlier you can detect an incoming ICBM, and if you could launch the countermeasures and generate high energy X-rays, the better the chances are of taking out that ICBM.
okay? So you're saying so we had this understanding, and we wanted to test this out.
Yeah,
So
yep,
we it sounds like bluegill was about first of all testing to see if we could explode something to create the X-rays. Is that correct?
that's yeah. Device test the device to generate the X-rays.
Okay, so bluegill was a series of tests to see if we could generate the X-rays, and what was the government doing because this was so novel and they really had to understand it? You've explained to me they were really like watching this close. They had all these ships arrayed to watch it and planes in the air, right?
Yep, yeah. So they're fully instrumented. There was hundreds of thousands of instruments all watching the nuclear fireball. They had to film it in very high speed photography to, watch the fireball expansion, because that's the only way they could determine the yield. They needed to watch the expansion rate very slowly. And so there was five high altitude ones which were outside of the Earth's atmosphere or very close to being outside, that wanted to test various EMP generation nuclear warheads and X-ray, which are two different methodologies, um, to test whether those devices would work as designed.
Okay, but my what I'm getting is so we had the planes in the air filming this, right? So the
Yep,
because this was so critical, we wanted to see what happened and record it. So we
yep,
had we had a bunch of planes, and there were two particular planes that were taking film
yep,
of this series of tests, right?
yep.
And and did you discover this film in the archive?
It's been publicly available since 1998, so I'm not sure I could say I've discovered it, but
Okay, okay,
um,
okay. So now the point for the audience is that there are two films we want to show. So in the course of like the U.S. government filming this test, they saw a UFO following the rocket. Correct?
well, that footage. This is you're going to love this. 37 days before the bluegill prime test, there was another weapons test. It was just a dummy warhead in the Atlantic Missile Range, launched from Cape Canaveral. They had one of these, what they call KC-135 aircraft. They're still in use. They call them Cobra Ball aircraft. They've got special cameras fitted to them that watch incoming ICBM tests. So, 37 days prior, on the 19th of September 1962, they launched the Atlas 8F missile with a dummy warhead. It was an Avco Mark IV re-entry vehicle, which was a special re-entry vehicle made of phenolic resin, not made of metal. It was made sort of like fiberglass. And they just wanted to test the accuracy of where that re-entry vehicle landed in near Ascension Island in the Atlantic. But what they found when they filmed that re-entry vehicle coming in, it had a dummy warhead that weighed the same as a regular warhead, so probably near a ton of metal, just so it had the same mass and traveled the same flight characteristics. What they found was when this re-entry vehicle was coming in to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, it was traveling at Mach 18. Something just appeared alongside it and traveled with it for about 90 seconds. This is it here.
Okay, so I will play. So this is the film from the U.S. National Archive, right?
This is from the Deputy Secretary of Defense. They were the
Okay.
ones that uploaded this.
Wow. Okay. So this is that missile on that first test, and you can
Yeah.
see
So
see the
that's the re-entry vehicle down below, burning up as it comes into the atmosphere. And that object there has just appeared out of nowhere, and it's pacing that re-entry vehicle at the same speed. Now, that can't be just debris, because momentum, it'd have to weigh the same as that re-entry vehicle to be able to pace at Mach 18 coming in to the Earth's atmosphere. So the post-flight test report says that they can't identify what that object is. That they've got no idea what it is.
okay, and you said Mach
So,
18,
so
so that's 18 times the speed of sound.
sound, yep,
The speed of sound is like 700 or something miles an hour.
yeah. So this is 37 days prior to bluegill triple prime test. So they've kind of got an idea that maybe something's following them and has an interest in their nuclear weapons. So there is pre-knowledge that potentially they could take something out.
Okay, and then so then when the actual test took place,
Yep.
um, let me share this screen. What happened then?
This footage I really is a smoking gun, I believe. It shows an object getting shot out of the sky out of the nuclear fireball.
Okay, so the test that took place with the actual explosives, they filmed that, and they had two
Yep.
different planes filming it,
Yeah, the
and
call signs were Kettle 1 and Kettle 2.
Kettle One and Kettle Two. So we see that at the top here, and both of those pieces of film were released to the public, right? But what you
Yep.
found was that one of them they censored. We're going to see a UFO, like an unidentified object, fall from the explosion into the ocean. And on one of the films, they put a triangle over it and they censored it so the viewer wouldn't know what it was. But it was a different department that put out the other film and they didn't censor it, right?
Yep. So this is in normal spectrum footage.
So
You
we
can
can
see
see it.
that object. Yep.
So this is after the
No.
explosion. This object fell.
Yep. So that fireball diameter is approximately a kilometer wide. So that object must be at least 50 meters, 100 meters wide, or 300 feet as it falls.
Wow. And you've got that's played in slow motion right now, right?
Yep.
Okay. Now I'm going to advance to the second film.
So this footage here is called X-ray phenomenology. It uses special filters, and they can actually see inside the fireball to see what's going on. And this one was particularly unique because there's a double pulse that you can see occur, and that's the first and only time that they've ever seen that double pulse within a fireball occur.
Wow.
But as you can see, there's a big redaction of where that object appears to fall from in the other footage. You see
So
the
this is the
pulse wave
triangle.
there.
Yeah.
Yep.
So covering it up.
Yep.
And you've explained that those two films came from different groups, right? Could you just tell me briefly what those
Yep.
groups were?
So one of the aircraft was run by the Los Alamos National Laboratory, and this is the array of aircraft that are around that test.
Okay.
The second one was run by Lawrence Livermore. They both had EG&G camera crews on board, but the animosity between Los Alamos and Lawrence Livermore is well documented. So we believe the discrepancy in declassification, where one's released it in full and the other hasn't, is purely because of the animosity between the two labs.
Wow. Wow.
I've actually uh, put a mandatory declassification request into the Department of Energy to have that footage redacted, that redaction removed
The triangle.
from the extra. Yep.
Yeah.
And they come back to me and said that they can't locate the footage. They've misplaced it. So that's critical nuclear weapons design footage, one of a kind, that they've only seen that pulse happen once, and they claim they can't see it. So
Wow.
that's a felony straight off the bat.
Wow.
And the Department of Energy Secretary Jennifer Grantham has stated publicly that the Department of Energy has no idea of UFOs. They've never had any dealings with them, which is, she lacks candor when she says that, basically.
Yeah. So I want to be clear. So we've looked at the film footage. We see the unexplained object, traveling at a high speed, and then we see in the second film it falling out. You're not just deducing that this is a UFO. I mean, it seems like it's something, right? But you've also found internal government documents that talk about this, right?
Yep. The ship logs of the recovery of the days after, like, that object could not be part of the missile. There can't be anything because the missile is nowhere near that. It's 100 kilometers away. It's flown up to 170 kilometers height and released the RV. The RV has re-entered down through the atmosphere down to height of 48 kilometers and then detonated. So that there's no missile debris or rocket engines or anything like that. Just that's not
So
there.
you're
That
saying that,
thing falling,
yeah.
yeah.
You're saying the rocket itself would have separated earlier, and this was a
It's yeah,
reentry vehicle, and it wasn't.
it's nowhere near it. Nowhere
Okay.
near it.
Okay. All right. Now,
Yeah.
so what you did is you went and you looked at ship. You were actually able to find ship logs, right?
Yep.
Which you've shared with me, um, and it shows that they went and recovered something. Correct?
Yeah. The days after, and mind you, that event happened at the peak of the Cuban Missile Crisis, October 26th, 1962. So General LeMay's got his bombers on the runway, revved up, ready to bomb the crap out of the Soviet Union at that time. And all of a sudden, suddenly they've knocked out this spacecraft from somewhere else. It's not Soviet and it's not theirs. And then this thing's appeared out of nowhere, landed in the water. They've recovered it. And I suspect that's why Khrushchev backed off in a hurry, the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Now, so just to be clear, though, you went and are there any documents of the ones you've sent me that you want me to show that are related to this? We don't have to go through them all, obviously, but is there anything in particular you'd like me to share? Any of the bluegill documents?
Well, with the relation to, there's a ship called the USNS Point Barrow. It was a specialized ship that the aft end was able to be semi-submerged, and you could recover objects or parts of vessels, parts of ships, put them in there, and then pump the water out and lift it out of the water. So there was two vessels, the Point Barrow and another diver class recovery ship called the USS Safeguard.
Okay.
Their ship logs, the Point Barrow ship logs have disappeared. No one can find them, but the Safeguard mentions Point Barrow being in that recovery operation over the period of the 26th of October to the 30th of October 1962. Now, in 1983, the Department of Health actually notified Department of Energy that a lot of people involved in the Dominic test series and atmospheric test series in Nevada were starting to get leukemia. So they commissioned a company called Cayman Tempo to look into the high radiation readings of the people involved in those test series. And Cayman Tempo were hardly impartial. They'd actually taken part in Operation Dominic and provided instrumentation. So the US government's sort of commissioned them to write a report that they know they need to reach a conclusion that exonerates the US government. Otherwise, their workers that were involved are probably going to sue them. So, but what they found was the UNS Point Barrow had the second highest radiation readings of all the 70 ships that were part of Operation Dominic, and it had no assigned tasks that would expose it to radiation at all. It was just to monitor ionospheric winds using instrumentation. Got nowhere near any radiation, no radioactive fallout or anything like that. So that was noted in that report that the Point Barrow should not have had that much radiation dose. And I believe it's from the object that they recovered after Bluegill Triple Prime.
So you're saying that there was a ship that was far away, it wouldn't have been irradiated by the explosion, and then it went
Yeah,
into that's the ship that the documents show it retrieved the object, right? They
yeah.
they call it a pod, right? They say they recovered the pod, I think, in the document.
There was some instrumentation pods that were about a mile or so distant from the blast that had instrumentation on there to measure the X-ray, so they knew that the X-ray component worked, and they were all recovered successfully. They weren't the object that fell down.
Okay.
That was their job. They recovered those pods. They did that within the first 3 hours of the test, as
Okay.
the ship logs. So
Okay.
that yeah, the other recovery operations, there was other nuclear airdrop tests going on, but they weren't part of it. Their assigned tasks were the high altitude tests, and they recovered something in those days. The logs
Okay.
clearly demonstrate that.
And I think you said the logs say that they noted that it was something they had never seen before. It was a strange shape, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And,
There was anonymous objects that they picked up that were radioactive because they measured them when they picked them up, and the safeguard actually lost power when it hooked one of these objects up in its net to recover it on board. And it was a DC powered ship, which is unusual because DC is not normally affected by electromagnetic pulses because it's not an alternating current. And a ship normally runs with the two main generators separately. So if you lose one, you don't lose the whole ship. That ship lost complete power at that
wow.
time.
Wow. So the idea is that I guess this unknown craft um, was highly radioactive, and it probably was powered by radioactive, nuclear power.
Possibly, but that X-ray spallation mechanism possibly destroyed the propulsion mechanism of whatever it used for propulsion, and possibly killed or injured whoever was inside or whatever was inside.
Wow. Okay.
So they recovered that, and because that test was run by a division of the department, or the Atomic Energy Commission at the time was called the Division of Military Application. That was run out of the Albuquerque operations office in New Mexico. And the guy in charge at the time was a guy named Lawrence Preston Guys. He is the grandfather of Jeff Bezos.
Oh,
So he and another scientist that's still around named Harold Malgrim. He was a science advisor to President Kennedy. He came out just a couple of months ago on Twitter and said that Lawrence Preston Guys had said that they had recovered UAP or a downed craft. They'd shot it down. So that's the connection with the Bluegill Triple Prime and
okay.
Jeff Bezos.
Okay. Now I want to before we go on to the second part of the interview, I want to also mention you recently published an article. I mentioned the LeMay article, but you published another article where that that UAP that was shot down in Alaska over the town of Deadhorse. Um,
Yep.
the government said, we shot down this UAP. It was an F-22 that shot it down, and then we never heard anything about it. We never saw any pictures, but we saw pictures of the Chinese balloon, right? Um,
Yep.
so that raises questions. And then is it the Canadian government that released a log under a FOIA request?
Yeah, that's right. And the Canadians, strangely, don't redact people's names. So I was able to research, and some of those people had fairly obscure French last names. I looked them up on LinkedIn, and they were in Florida at that time.
Oh, wow. Wow. So basically this log, right? this, so someone submitted a FOIA request from the Canadian government, and it
Yeah.
was it was the base in Canada that was involved with what, retrieving this thing.
Well, there was actually two incidents over a period of 2 days. On the 10th of February, there was a black or metallic object, floating object over Dead Horse, Alaska, that F-22 Raptors from Elmendorf Air Force Base shot down and recovered whatever they shot down. And we had a person on the ground that was documenting all this. They'd filmed it. They were an oil field worker up near the Kaparik River and Prudhoe Bay. They filmed everything, all the C-130s, refueling Black Hawk helicopters. I've actually been up to that place, and the terrain is very flat. It was in February, so the sea was frozen over. It would have been very easy to recover that object. And then because NORAD, Canadians can task F-22s, they've got an arrangement that both countries can task military assets. What was unique was with that particular incident in Dead Horse that it was the because it was deemed a threat to the continental United States. After 9/11, the facility at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida looks after those sort of potential threats. And what was happening during that event over a period of 12 hours was that the facility kept losing power, had massive power fluctuations. And you can see that in the logs that the mission commander has just said, just leave the damn diesel generators running, just so they can shoot, because they'd formulated a plan to shoot down this object from, I believe, either President Biden or General Van Herk at Colorado at the NORAD headquarters. And they were implementing that plan, and then suddenly they started getting all these massive power surges at their facility. And mind
So,
you,
so just to be clear for the audience, so this operation was taking place up in Dead Horse, where there was
Alaska.
this recovery well, they were tracking this and they eventually shot it down, right?
Yep.
But it was during the time that they were tracking it, right? And I guess when they had the F-22 around it,
Yep.
um, the operation was being commanded on a base in Florida. It was a NORAD command
Yep.
base in Florida, right?
Yep. Tyndall Air Force Base.
Okay, and your point is that when the F-22s engaged this unidentified object, the base in Florida, the command base in Florida, lost power.
Yep. Several times.
Several times, right? So with
Yep.
several engagements, right?
Yep. It's 3,000 nautical miles away.
Okay. Now, and you've learned this because you went through. I'm showing now. This is the Canadian log that
Yep.
was released under the FOIA request. You can see
Yep.
a lot of it's redacted here, right? But what Geoff
Yep.
did, in Geoff's article, he methodically, literally went line by line. And so in his article, he's like line one, line two, and he explains. There's a lot of abbreviations here and acronyms, right?
Yep.
And I guess you have a lot of military knowledge, and you understood some of the terms anyhow, but then you were able to figure out other ones and research them. So you're able to like walk through, and so you figured this out from this log, this FOIA released log. That's what happened. That's where you figured out when they engaged with the F-22, they lost power at the headquarters in Florida.
Yeah. My previous experience with Boeing is we ran a facility. We were contractors to the Department of Defense, a certain part of the Department of Defense, and our logs. If we screwed something up, they'd go back to our logs and rebate our contract. So we'd have to pay them. So you had to make sure the logs were pretty good, otherwise you get rebated. So I used to do these logs. This is how I'd know how to read them properly.
Oh, I see. Wow.
And just having that many power failures while you're in the middle of a very, very critical operation. And Tyndall Air Base is unique because it's a base of resilience. It was the first one after it got hit pretty hard by Hurricane Michael in 2018. And because it's the key base in NORAD, the US government built backup systems for their backup systems. It's got renewable energy, it's got solar, it's got batteries, it's got diesel. They
Wow.
all failed, and the diesels were the only things that kept it going pretty much
Wow.
during that event.
So so there are two things we're taking away from this analysis. One is that clearly the government said this was an unidentified object initially. I think they changed the story afterwards. We know an F-22 engaged it. They didn't release any photos like they did with the Chinese balloon. So we're guessing it really is an unidentified object. We have video documentation, which I watched, of that oil worker. He's videotaping the recovery effort. They shut down all the airspace. Nothing but military could fly in. They were doing fly arounds in circles, sort of surveilling the area to keep it secure, right? And only
Yeah,
military craft were allowed to go in and out, right? So it was a really big like recovery operation. But the second, so we're saying like this validates like they knew this was a UFO, right? And they recovered it. But the second point is you're speculating that it can't just be chance that the most secure NORAD base in Florida that was rebuilt after the hurricane, so it would never lose power, right? That it lost
yeah,
power just at the moment the F-22s engaged this UAP. You're saying that it could be a sign that this thing had highly sophisticated defenses
yeah.
that were tracing
Countermeasures.
all the way back
Yep,
to that where that the commands were being given, correct?
that's right. And this is what the Americans were doing in the Cold War with Operation Palladium, recording the radar reflections coming in, storing them, and sending them back out. So maybe they're using our own tricks against us.
Wow. Okay, so that's phase one of our discussion. Now I want to go into phase two. And so phase two, we said it's all about the research you've done has validated a number of the so-called MJ12 documents, right?
Yeah.
So so if you could just review again, like what were the MJ12 documents, just an overview for the audience, and then we'll get into the
So in the early 1980s, some documents surfaced, were given to various researchers. And at the time, as you mentioned in the introduction, the debunkers came out and said, "Oh no, they're fake." But they came from various different sources, and a gentleman named Timothy Cooper was one of the main sources. He was a private investigator, but he was part of a association called the Association of Former Intelligence Officers, and he was a member of that. And there was certain other people that were ex-CIA that were also in that group that I think watched him carefully and then started giving him data that they had stored, possibly as insurance against anything adverse that would come out later on with them, and particularly CIA staff that were located in the Mexico City station prior to and after the JFK assassination.
um,
So I think they kept documents as an insurance policy in case, and they knew eventually the truth would come out, even if they weren't alive when it happened. Most of them had passed on by now, but they knew that this information had to get out, so they started feeding this information out.
okay, so the information came out in waves. Like the first Cooper, like he just received in the mail some film and he
Yep,
developed it, and it was photographs of all these documents, right? So he was
yep,
a UFO researcher. He published these pictures, right, of these
yep,
documents, and then
yep,
more documents came out during the 80s and into the 90s up through like 97 or something, correct?
yep,
And they're called MJ12 because I guess what we learned from the documents is there was a small group of people that initially Harry Truman created in the CIA called Majestic 12 or MJ12. That was their code name.
yep.
And they were initially tasked with dealing with the Roswell recovery, correct? That's what the documents indicated.
Yeah, the Roswell incident was a bit of a turf war because the Army counterintelligence corps, they'd been in Germany after the war and interviewed people about the Foo Fighters. They want to know what they were. Um, the US Navy Office of Naval Intelligence wanted to cut in. So there was a big power battle when Roswell occurred over who should get what, and whose authority. Was it the president? Was it the Joint Chiefs of Staff that had authority over that? Um, and yeah, the Secretary of War for the Air at that time, because the Air Force wasn't officially stood up by July 1947, was a guy named Stuart Symington. And he was a good friend of then Congressman Jack Kennedy. And he informed Kennedy of the Roswell event a couple of days after it happened.
Wow. Wow. So then later, during a lot of these MJ-12 documents, right? They um, are related to the Kennedy administration, and they reveal that the CIA had well that JFK ultimately wanted to share with he decided he wanted to share with Russia, with the USSR, Soviet Union, their knowledge of UFOs, right? Because and the idea is that eventually you believe, and many believe, that's why JFK was killed, because he was saying to the CIA basically, look, it's dangerous for us to not share our knowledge of UFOs with the USSR, because they might mistake a UFO for being one of our missiles, right? And it could cause a war. So we want to be open and transparent about this, right?
Well, that and plus the thing they shot down during the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's the closest humans have ever come to nuclear annihilation. And I think when they found this being or beings and non-human intelligence and their craft, it made both Kennedy and Khrushchev step back and think, we need to work together on this. And this is when Kennedy started getting things into place. And I don't know if you've seen these speech at the American University on June 10th, 1963. He talked about Pax Americana.
Wow.
He says, we need peace on Earth, but we don't need it through Pax Americana, meaning, peace enforced by US weapons of war. So basically, he was saying to the military industrial complex, your time's up. We're going to work together with the Soviets on this, and just put a target on his head, basically.
Okay, so we've talked a bit about the MJ-12. Now I want to talk about the relevant events here, because the two documents we want to look at are I guess the calendar, right? JFK's calendar.
Yep.
So if we could back up just one more time before we get into that, what happened here is, could you just explain the sequence of events here in terms of Operation Palladium?
So in September 1960, for some reason, the CIA sent he was the Q of James Bond, the scientist that knows everything, makes all the gadgets. The CIA actually had a guy that was the version of Q. His name was David Lamar Christ. He was a scientist. He was the very first scientist that the CIA ever recruited in 1950. For some reason, they sent him into Cuba 3 times for a special black project that today still won't reveal what it was, but he got arrested. And the Cubans put him in a prison called the Isle of Pines prison, which was adjacent to the Bay of Pigs. And they tortured him, and he gave them everything. He'd worked on the Israeli atomic weapon that the CIA had assisted them develop, because James Jesus Angleton admitted this in his church committee testimony, which was only declassified in 2022. So he had all that information. I believe he was involved in trying to reverse engineer whatever they had from Roswell and some of the other crashes. So this guy's in a prison in Cuba, getting tortured, revealing everything. He tells the Cubans, who pass it on to Khrushchev, about what they're doing with the radar, playing with the radar, putting fake UFO signatures in there, which is Operation Palladium. And so in Kennedy's first meeting with Khrushchev in early June 1961, Khrushchev says, you guys are fooling with our radar. we know this, and it's called an operation
But
called Majestic 12.
Jeff, let me just back up here. We didn't explain palladium. So with the idea here is that um, the CIA working with the military without the president's knowledge, right? They
Yep.
began sending fake signals into Soviet airspace, right?
Yep.
And the idea was they figured the Soviets wouldn't know if it was a U.S. spy plane or a UFO because both the Soviets and the U.S. were seeing a lot of these UFOs ever since World War II, really, right? So
Yep.
so the U.S. we started sending these fake like radar signals into
Yep.
Soviet airspace, and JFK didn't know about it. The
No, it
president
was a
didn't know about it.
psychological warfare.
Right. So
That
he
was a
comes into
part of the
office.
psychological warfare.
Yeah, he comes into office in early 61. And what was it? April, he meets with Khrushchev, right?
June. Yep.
June. Okay. So,
June. Yep.
so your point is that in the meantime, we had this top guy who was working on this Operation Palladium. He was sent into Cuba to do something, some secret operation, and he was captured and he was being tortured. And the idea is that he revealed the details about Operation Palladium, right? The
Yep.
Cubans told Khrushchev. So when Kennedy meets with Khrushchev, you believe what happened is Khrushchev confronted Kennedy about this operation, and Kennedy didn't know what he was talking about,
That's right.
right?
Yep.
So then Kennedy comes back and he calls a meeting on June 28th with the head of the CIA,
Dollars. Alan
Dulles,
Dulles.
right? Okay, so the point here is that one of these MJ12 documents that was released, right, that was top secret, that
Yep.
everyone's trying to debunk and saying it's baloney, they're fake documents. There's a document in these MJ12 documents that show Kennedy saying on June 28th, it's dated June 28th, he says to Dulles, I want to meet you and I want you to tell me all about this MJ12, the Palladium program, right?
Yep.
Is that correct?
That's well, it says review of MJ12 intelligence operations as they relate to Cold War psychological warfare plans.
Okay.
So that Dulles was in the room, sitting in there with Kennedy and a few of the other administration staff, and basically Kennedy hands him that. It's
So
Maxwell
I'm showing
Taylor. Yep,
this is the
that's
memo,
the
right?
one.
So
Yep.
this is so the audience understand this is the MJ12 document. Everyone's saying, oh, it's fake. These are all
Yep.
fabricated documents. Now what Geoff has done in his research is he was able to go into the National Archive and find the diary entry for basically JFK's schedule on June 28th. And then he also found Alan Dulles' schedule on June 28th. And both of them show that Kennedy met with Dulles twice on June 28th, right?
Yep.
So that validates the veracity of this MJ12 document, right?
Well, the fact that Dulles met JFK twice on the 28th of June was not available when this document surfaced. So it was classified information. So if it was a fake document, someone would have had to have had access to classified information to generate that. You know, the chances that they randomly picked the 28th of June 1961 as the day to make, you know, the memo that JFK wants to know about MJ12, it's pretty remote.
Yeah. So here it says, it was June 28th, 61, to the Director of Central Intelligence, review of MJ12 intelligence operations as they relate to the Cold War psychological warfare. I don't know what that says.
That part was the key, and they're talking about palladium there. And palladium was
Oh,
not
okay.
declassified until 2003. This
Okay.
document surfaced nearly 10 years before that. So that's the psychological warfare part. They're injecting fake signals into the Soviet air defense system to mess with their heads.
Okay. And
And Kennedy's
he's,
saying, "I want to know about it. What he's doing. You know,
yeah,
this could turn bad if you don't
right.
tell me what you're doing."
So I'd like a brief summary from you at your earliest convenience. Okay. So
Yep.
let me get out of this. Okay, and then I just want to show the logs for our audience here. So this is
That's
Dulles',
Dulles'
right?
calendar.
Okay,
Yep.
so we see it's Wednesday, June 28th, 12 o'clock, meeting the president. Then he has these other meetings, and then 3:30, the president.
Yep.
So we see that Dulles clearly met with JFK on that
Yep.
day.
And that at 11, you see Patrick Coyne. That's he was in the meeting again with Dulles at 3:30. So Kennedy surrounded himself with these heavy hitters and delivered the ultimatum to Dulles and said, "We want to know what this is all about."
And I just want to share the JFK. So we see here, this is JFK's calendar, and it matches up. So there's another. I won't show the other document, but this is the 12. He says 12-1, just like on Dulles' calendar,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
so the point again for the audience here, the point is that this is showing, right, that these MJ12, it's validating the MJ12 documents, which people have tried to debunk, right? It's not, you're not validating every document, but it's clearly showing that, you know, this was a real document, right?
I believe so. Yep.
Um, and then could you tell us a little bit more? There was
Well,
some of the other,
Dulles
yeah, go ahead.
Dulles is good friends with John McCone. John McCone was he was the chairman of the AEC up until December 1960. He facilitated the uranium from the Numek factory to go to the Israelis to develop their bomb, and Dulles worked with him on that. And Seymour Hersh has documented in his book called The Samson Option that John McCone suddenly spilled the beans to the New York Times that the Israelis had an atomic bomb just out of the blue. And I think that was because Dave Christ was involved in that and probably told the Soviets that they were giving the Israelis a nuclear bomb. So McCone wanted to get ahead of the story before the Soviets did. So he's come out just completely out of the blue and said, yeah, the Israelis lied to us. They've got a nuclear weapon. So McCone is one of the old boys club with Alan Dulles. They know each other. So Alan Dulles realizes that John F. Kennedy is probably going to sack him or fire him when he refuses to give him majestic document MJ12 information or the psychological warfare program. So he gets together with Alan Dulles, gets a meeting with John McCone and Prescott Bush, who is George H.W. Bush's father, and they devise a plan to work out what's going to happen when Kennedy finds out and hits the roof. And that's on the 26th of September in Dulles' calendar that there's a meeting with John McCone, however, the deep state did it. They managed to convince JFK to replace Alan Dulles with John McCone, who was exactly the same. He was on the same team as Dulles. So Alan Dulles doesn't immediately respond to JFK about the MJ12 project. He waits until Sunday, the 5th of November, to send an operations review to JFK, where he gives a brief overview of Operation Palladium about sending intelligence operations against Soviet Union currently active in two broad areas: aircraft launch vehicles, incorporating ELINT and SIGINT capabilities, and balloon buoyant decoys with ECM equipment. That is Project Palladium. It's flat out. Now, this document came in 1999, 2000. Project Palladium was not declassified by then. So again, someone's had to have inside information about that project And it wasn't called palladium by that stage. That only came about in April 1962. This document is dated the 5th of November 1961. And right at the bottom, JFK says, for reasons of security, I cannot divulge pertinent data on some of the more sensitive aspects of MJ12 activities which have been deemed properly classified under the 1954 Atomic Energy Act. So basically saying to the president, you do not have a need to know about what we're doing. So just keep your nose out of it, basically. And unsurprisingly, Kennedy fires him.
So Dulles says, I'm not going to share the information with you.
Yep.
And Kennedy fires him. And
Yep.
and then eventually Kennedy puts together a memo. So these are in these documents. We're running out of time here, unfortunately, but Kennedy
Yep.
puts together a memo saying, I want you to share our UFO information because it's so dangerous. The Soviets didn't know what those signals were. They thought it could be us attacking them. It could be a missile. It could be, they didn't know if it was a UFO or what, right? And
Yep.
it's risky. So I want to start being transparent and share our UFO information with them. And
Yep.
then what, weeks later, he was assassinated.
No, this was 1961. So John
Oh,
McCain took
61.
over.
Okay.
You know, obviously Kennedy didn't know what was going on with MJ12 project. Khrushchev said, I warned you to get on top of this. You're not doing it. So we're going to put intermediate range ballistic missiles, nuclear tipped, in Cuba so we can get around you fooling with our air defense system. And that's how the Cuban Missile Crisis started.
Wow. Wow. Well, Geoff, there was more we wanted to get to, but unfortunately we're out of time. It's
We'll do it another time, Mike. It's been fun.
there's a lot to this, but okay. Hey, we really appreciate it. This was excellent. And I wish we had more time to go through more of it because there's so much valuable information here, but we really appreciate it.
Yep. I've got a document that I'll share with your viewers, and it's got all the links that we've discussed. Yeah, so I'll send that on.
Oh, great. And so we'll post that and we'll share that with them.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Geoff.
Thank you, Mike.